Hi, I'm Kristen Goodwin. On this episode of the Fox News Rundown, the Senate voting to move forward with the second impeachment trial of former President Donald Trump, with 6 Republican lawmakers joining Democrats to say they believe the trial is constitutional. Fox News at Night anchor and Fox News Chief Legal Correspondent Shannon Bream breaks down what to expect in the days ahead and the arguments on both sides of the aisle. U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement reportedly preparing to issue new guidelines to curb the deportations of immigrants for crimes including driving under the influence or fraud, instead focusing on national security threats and those convicted of aggravated felonies. Fox national correspondent William Lajeunesse discusses President Biden's immigration agenda and measures aimed at rolling back his predecessor's policies. Plus commentary from syndicated columnist Cal Thomas. The Fox News Rundown is a daily news podcast where we take a deeper look at the stories important to you. You can subscribe on your favorite podcast player by going to foxnewspodcast.com.
I'm Dana Perino.
I'm Juan Williams.
I'm Kennedy, and this is the Fox News Rundown.
Wednesday, February 10th, 2021. I'm Lisa Brady. Instead of case dismissed, the second Trump impeachment trial will continue after an emotional opening.
Listen, this is not like a regular trial or legal proceeding. It is so different in so many ways. It's much more political in nature.
I'm Dave Anthony. President Biden is changing more Trump-era policy on immigration that could drive more migrants to our border.
So if you incentivize people to come here and you promise to give them health care and you know they're going to get a bus ticket to go live with someone and then they don't have to show up for their court appearance because ICE is not going to come get them because there's no interior enforcement, they have to keep your nose clean. So why wouldn't you come?
And I'm Cal Thomas. I've got the final word on the Fox News Rundown.
The historic second impeachment trial of now former President Donald Trump opened with a flashback to the chaos and violence of January 6th when the Capitol was attacked. House impeachment managers offering a timeline of video evidence as they argue the former president incited insurrection with his claims of a stolen election and encouragement to fight.
We will stop the steal.
As Congress prepared to certify the Electoral College results, though the video left out Trump's appeal to peacefully and patriotically make their voices heard.
You will not be hearing extended lectures from me because our case is based on cold, hard facts.
But the lead impeachment manager, Maryland Congressman Jamie Raskin, did get personal, breaking down as he explained how one of his grown daughters, invited to witness the peaceful transfer of power that day, reacted.
And I promised her that it would not be like this again the next time she came back to the Capitol with me. And you know what she said? She said, "Dad, I don't want to come back to the Capitol."
The defense team for the former president condemned the Capitol attack and the rioters who carried it out, but they argue that Trump's words at a rally near the Capitol were figurative, and attorney Bruce Castor says the trial is political.
The majority in the House of Representatives does not want to face Donald Trump as a political rival in the future. That's the real reason we're here.
Attorney David Schoen also hitting critics of the former president for talk of deprogramming Trump supporters.
But at the end of the day, this is not just about Donald Trump or any individual. This is about our Constitution and abusing the impeachment power for political gain.
They also argue that Trump was denied due process rights after the House voted to impeach without holding any hearings. And they say the trial is unconstitutional now that he's out of office. But after Tuesday's opening round, the Senate voted to let the trial continue. 6 Republicans joining Democrats in finding the trial is constitutional, just over a month since the deadly siege at the same building.
One of the first things you learn as a law student and as a young attorney is you want to emotionally connect with your jury if you can.
Shannon Bream is the Fox News at Night anchor and Fox News Chief Legal Correspondent.
And this is no ordinary jury. These are senators who lived through that day, who were also worried about their staff and themselves and their family and friends who may have been around the Capitol. So to take them back to that day was a very effective opening salvo in this whole thing. But they're also not a typical jury in that most of them have probably made up their minds about whether this is or isn't constitutional and whether they're ultimately going to vote to convict. So you have to wonder who the argument is for then. And I think much of that video was also aimed at a broader audience, to the American people. It is something that for the Democrats really rallies them as this opposition to now former President Trump. They find it to be a unifying thing. So you've got the jury there in front of you, the senators, but I think that this video was intended for a much broader, wider audience.
Mm-hmm. Do you expect them to maybe keep coming back to that, even at the risk of maybe traumatizing some of the members who did live through it?
I do think it's an effective tool in taking people back to the emotions of that day, to the worries that they had, and to intersperse that with what the president was saying or what he was suggesting. But I think the timeline is really important because you have to know what he was saying, when he was saying it, at the timing of when people were actually going on that incursion into the Capitol that turned violent and deadly in several cases. So there are already people who are raising concerns and are raising objections to the video that was shown in the House, saying that it violates laws about, or at least procedures and rules about what can be shown over in Congress when it comes to editing video. So there are going to be objections to it, but I would definitely expect to see more snippets of it, just as the president's team, now former President Trump's team, is going to use video they think makes their case as well.
One of his attorneys, Bruce Castor, said they changed their strategy.
I'll be quite frank with you. We changed what we were going to do on account that we thought that the House manager's presentation was well done. And I wanted you to know that we have responses to those things.
Do you think the defense responded successfully so far?
I think they seemed a little bit scattered. I think that you may have something planned, but again, these attorneys have not had weeks and months to work on this, much like the House managers have and knew who they were putting together. That team has been solidified for several weeks as this went through the House and then prepping for the Senate. You know, the president has had some difficulty in keeping his legal team together, and so they're going to be less prepared. They're just simply going to have less time to be ready to meet these, arguments as they come. So it was a powerful video, I think, for everybody who saw it, regardless of whether you're a supporter of the president or somebody who opposes him. It was a terrible day for this country, so it was a very effective opening argument. And I do think his team, at least Bruce Castor, seemed a little rattled, a little scattered in how he was going about his arguments. Joan, I think, seemed much more organized and sticking to his script and pretty much sounded like he was going to get to the arguments about whether this whole thing is constitutional or not, and really dig out facts and precedent and stick to the script for what he had planned.
I know the president's defense team was quick to say they condemn the attack on the Capitol and denounce the rioters.
You will not hear any member of the team representing former President Trump say anything but in the strongest possible way denounce the violence of the rioters and those that breached the Capitol.
How difficult it is for them to be only to say that, in words, though, when they're essentially up against all of that video evidence of how bad it was.
And I think it was a smart thing for them to do right out of the gate, to say from the president on down, we want nothing to do with this. We distance from this. The president said that day the violence wasn't okay. They're going to try to obviously point to those statements and to their complete, distancing from what happened that day. So I think, listen, this is not like a regular trial or legal proceeding. It is so different in so many ways. It's much more political in nature. So you're not looking at the same sort of setup as you would have, say, in a criminal trial. This is going to be very different. And I think that the House managers who are prosecuting this case, essentially, if you want to use that word, against former President Trump, are going to weigh on emotions. They are going to make, I think, political entreaties as well. I think that they're going to want these senators to think very much about their political future and what it means and what kind of statement they're making with these votes. I think there's some senators who have been very clear about how they feel, and nothing they see is going to change their vote for or against this. But I think there are maybe 5 or 10 there that are persuadable, especially among the Republicans. The problem is the Democrats need to get far beyond that to actually get to a conviction. It doesn't look like right now they'll be able to do it.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you if you thought any minds had been changed on day one, because the vote to say that the trial is constitutional and can continue ended up being 56 to 44. So there were 6 Republicans who sided with Democrats to say, yes, the trial is constitutional. Does that make it seem like maybe they won some Republicans over, or were those 6 Republicans always going to vote that way on letting it continue?
Well, they had a similar procedural vote a couple weeks ago, if you'll remember. That was brought up by GOP Senator Rand Paul, and I think the vote there was 55-45, so I think they picked up an additional vote. I think it was Senator Bill Cassidy out of Louisiana who sided with Democrats. So they expected it would probably be a very similar vote to what they saw a couple of weeks ago, with a handful of Republicans crossing over to say, this is not to our ultimate vote whether we'll say to convict or not, but we do think this proceeding is legitimate, this Senate trial. So they've won over at least one more in Bill Cassidy than they had a couple of weeks ago. So where that goes and whether they get any closer to the 17 they need is doubtful. But you have a number of Republican senators saying, listen, this is a process we think is important for the country. It meets constitutional muster. We're going to treat it with legitimacy and move forward.
One of the Republicans who voted to let it continue was someone who had been a frequent critic of the former president, Senator Ben Sasse. But it was interesting that during the defense initial arguments, Attorney Bruce Castor actually called him out.
The honorable gentleman from Nebraska, Mr. Sass, I saw that he faced backlash back home because of a vote he made some weeks ago. That political party was complaining about a decision he made as a United States Senator.
Suggesting he could pay a political price. Is that the defense's way of putting political pressure on Republicans who might be tempted to vote to convict, kind of reminding them that the former president remains popular in the party?
It could be. I think that moment where he was talking about Nebraska, there was some confusion. It seemed like Senator Ben Sasse from Nebraska, Senator Deb Fischer, who also is from Nebraska, turned around and said something to him. It looked like there was some confusion over, kind of what is he getting out by bringing this up. But I would say if you want to put political pressure on anybody, Ben Sasse is not the right person. If anything, I think it will backfire on you. He is a very immovable kind of guy once he is settled on a principle. And he's always been much more about the Constitution, about the country, than he is any particular leader or lawmaker or president. And that's really the core of where he comes from. So I think any attempt to try to move him on political pressure or, perceived harassment or bullying on, hey, former President Trump is still calling the shots for the GOP, I don't think that will work on Ben Sasse.
If there aren't enough votes to convict, and again, no one seems to think that's likely, could there be enough votes to still do what Democrats want as a possible punishment and disqualify Trump from holding office again? Or does it really take a conviction to get to that point?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, my understanding is from all the true experts on impeachment, which I am not, that you do have to get past that first hurdle. You're going to have to get to 67 votes to convict, or as our true Capitol Hill expert, Chad Pergram, our producer and reporter over there, says, you got to have 2/3 of the votes of those present. So it may not be 67, but we're assuming all 100 senators have a vote there. You got to get to 67 to get the conviction, and only then can you get to the next step, which would be to ban him from running for federal office again. So again, it's interesting that you got to think that Democrats know and Republicans know you're probably not getting to 67. It would take something very surprising that we had not anticipated or seen thus far. So if you can't get to that, it means you can't get to the question of whether to bar him from public office. So how much of this is just another public thrashing of former President Trump and his followers? How much of this is political? Well, all of impeachment is pretty much political.
How likely is it, do you think, that either side will end up calling witnesses, or that the Senate will even allow it?
At this point, it doesn't seem like they're going to go there. We've had a couple of Republicans, including Senator Lindsey Graham, who headed up the Judiciary Committee, who has been, for the most part, a close friend and supporter and defender of the president. He certainly was not on the issue of January 6th and felt the president should have done much more in that moment. But even he has said, listen, you guys want to do this. If you want to start calling witnesses, great. You're going to open that door. We will make this last weeks. We will call all kinds of witnesses. And technically, the Senate apparently is not supposed to conduct other business while it is conducting an impeachment trial. So you have to wonder how much either side is going to really have the stomach for tying everything up. It's the first 100 days for President Biden. They have judicial nominations, other kind of confirmations that they need to get through. So I think that there's going to have to be a discussion among Democratic leadership about whether they want to open that Pandora's box when it comes to witnesses.
Fox's Shannon Bream. Folks, don't miss her on the Livin the Bream podcast. Love the name of your podcast, Shannon. And thanks for spending some time with us on the Rundown.
Great to be with you. Thank you so much.
This is Cal Thomas with your Fox News commentary. Coming up.
President Biden has been in office 3 weeks now, and he's issued dozens of executive orders and actions.
Basically, the best way to describe them, to undo the damage Trump has done.
And that includes immigration policy. He stopped border wall construction and tried to put a temporary halt to deportations, but that's on hold after Texas sued. Now the Biden administration is readying new guidance for immigration and customs enforcement that's expected to direct ICE agents to only focus on deporting those here illegally who are national security risks or convicted of aggravated felonies or gang members. White House Press Secretary Ben Sasse.
Nobody is saying that DUIs or assault are acceptable behavior, and those arrested for such activities should be tried and sentenced as appropriate by local law enforcement. But we're talking about the prioritization of who is going to be deported from the country.
But in Texas, Jackson County Sheriff A.J. Louderback is upset. Some migrants are now being allowed to enter the U.S. even without COVID tests, telling Fox.
In the haste to open the border for everyone in this country, this is something that I expected to some degree.
It's not clear exactly when the expected new guidance for ICE will be made official.
We've all heard of sanctuary cities and states. This is almost a sanctuary nation.
William Lajeunesse is a Fox national correspondent based in Los Angeles who's reported from the border and south of it numerous times, including last week.
The Biden administration is proposing that the only individuals that ICE go after, or in their words, to spend precious resources, are individuals who, number one, are a national security threat, or number two, are being released on a conviction from state prison or federal prison or potentially jail on an aggravated felony or violent felony. So let's just say under California sanctuary law, if you've been arrested for a violent felony, you could be subject to ICE deportation. But they've raised that up even farther by saying it must be a convicted felon. But that also means let's look at the people who are not on that list. Kidnapping, robbery, burglary, DUI. These are not considered violent felonies, so those individuals can be arrested and or convicted and serve time, but they will not be turned over to ICE for deportation.
Okay, so in this case, you're talking about Biden policy. Under the Trump administration, there was a lot of concern in immigrant communities about ICE agents just going in and just grabbing people who were here illegally and getting rid of them. Was that something that really was happening?
No, it's misleading. I mean, ICE they have something called ERO, which is Enforcement and Removal Operations, and Fugitive Task Force. Almost exclusively, ICE was only going after individuals. I mean, 90% of the deportations in 2020 under ICE ERO, maybe say that arrests, because there were other deportations coming off the border. But the point is 90% were arrested for or convicted of a felony.
All right, let's go to the border. I know you recently had gone down in the Mexican border when you were in California. What's the situation there now? Because there are changes in policy when it comes to deportation and how we handle migrants coming here. What have you found out?
So it's so as we know, candidate Biden said a lot of stuff that said many things that were perceived as being conducive to a much warmer reception when you came to the border. Immigrants know this stuff. They have relatives on this side of the border who are texting them or calling them, telling them what the status is here. But they also have smugglers who basically live in their community, who recruit individuals who may want to come north. So what has happened, what I'm told agents say, since basically the election, when Joe Biden won, they have seen a steady increase in apprehensions along the border. People are coming. Now, the Biden administration says, hey, we're not ready for you yet. We need to get our asylum rules and regulations in place before we can process you. Now, they did promise to resume asylum process, which was generally suspended under President Trump, partially because of this Rule 42, which says that because of COVID, the Border Patrol is not taking anyone into custody. They're not apprehending anyone. They'll stop you at the border. They'll initial you in the field, take your fingerprint, and then take you immediately to the nearest port of entry and send you back to Mexico. So two things are happening. You have a surge of migrants coming from Central America up to the border. They're not able to get in, or they're getting in and then they're being returned. So Mexico is having a huge problem along its northern border with us as people are camping out. They're filling the shelters. They're obviously bringing COVID with it. Mexico is the third highest COVID rate in the world. And Mexico is now beginning to tell the United States, listen, we can no longer handle deported families with tender age under 12, families back here, because our resources are maxed to the limit. They actually even passed a rule or a law that they would not take back families with that status. Now, it's only happening for some reason in some areas of Texas, Del Rio and McAllen, Texas, or Reynosa. So right now, we're having this situation where you've heard of the term catch and release. And so what's happening is you have a lot of families coming over to the United States. Border Patrol cannot handle them in their processing facilities because of COVID has reduced capacity by 75%. So they are being let out. They're being taken to a bus station by the Border Patrol or ICE. They're given a bus ticket to go live with relatives somewhere in the United States. The one caveat there, which is so unusual, is, as we know, if you're an international traveler, you coming into New York or L.A. or any other international airport, you must have a negative COVID test within 72 hours of arrival. However, we are not testing these migrant families who we are taking to the bus station and giving them a ticket. So we don't know whether they have COVID or not.
Okay, so you're talking about in Texas, people under the current administration who are stopped at the border. Are we talking about just people under 12? Are we talking about adults as well, entire families? They're given bus tickets and then they're on their way in the U.S. somewhere.
Families, that's correct. Not single adults. Single adults are still being returned to Mexico.
Okay. All right. So families.
If they have a criminal record, they'll be turned over to ICE.
So they're not breaking the family up. They're keeping the family together and saying,
right.
Okay.
They'll give them a NTA, a notice to appear at some future date in court to have their asylum claim be heard. And so if you incentivize people to come here and you promise to give them health care and you know they're going to get a bus ticket to go live with someone and then they don't have to show up for their court appearance because ICE is not going to come get them because there's no interior enforcement if you keep your nose clean. So why wouldn't you come?
There was a debate a couple of years ago about these NTAs, as you talk about, notice to appear, and people, who were Trump defenders were saying, look, nobody really shows up to these hearings, and then they're lost and they're gone somewhere and they're just in the U.S. Is that true or not?
No, so what was happening, in this is Trump's fault for misstating the facts, but to go through a full immigration hearing can take 5 or 6 appearances. Immigrants would typically show up for the early court appearances until it was obvious that they were not going to be allowed to stay. So the one they wouldn't show up for was the last one, which would have been, they could have been taken into custody. So what Trump would have been more accurate to say is 90% of those who come here claiming for asylum are not removed.
So we've heard about, caravans even in January that were coming here. How many are there? A lot of caravans on the way?
Yes, there are caravans because I've been on 3 of them. Right now, I believe there's 3,005 apprehensions per day along the southwest border. So that's telling you what? People are continuing to come, and we're continuing to catch them and generally remove them. So caravans began to be developed because the cartels control the territory just south of the border. You're not going to make it to the border without paying somebody something. That's the way it works. So what they would do is, when you get a caravan of 2,000-3,000 people, well, the cartels couldn't control that. Neither can police. So they would overwhelm all these border checkpoints. Guatemala, we got to give a lot of credit to Guatemala for stopping the last caravan. And then Mexico has really beefed up its southern border because of the problem they have on their northern border. So if you're considering right now going north, do you want to try to go with a caravan, which is so big and obvious? Guatemala police and military cannot ignore it. International media has got a spotlight on you. I think you have a better chance going it alone somewhere along the border than going with a group of 5,000 people.
But then again, you're putting your life at the hands of a smuggler or someone you have to pay.
Yeah, but that's the way it's always been. I mean, you can't really. Well, I say you can't expect. That's just the way it is. That's the price of admission, if you will. And generally speaking, and this is funny, most of us don't understand it. If you're a Honduran or Guatemalan and you're suddenly in the middle of Mexico, you don't know where the heck you are. You don't know one direction or the next. And the people are, where's north, right? So they don't know. Not only do they not know Mexico, they don't know the border. The people who do are the smugglers. They know when to move you, and sometimes they'll move you as a cover for drugs. Depends on how much you pay. Are you a high interest target? Are you one of these guys from Iran or Yemen or somewhere else? But nevertheless, your chances of making it over the border without a guide are nil. This is not going to happen.
But you've been in these caravans. You've talked to these people. All of this risk and danger and unknown is worth it to them.
It is. It is. I mean, not to mention about the hurricanes, but it's generally wages. You can make, $2 a day or $7 an hour, okay, in the U.S. And so if there is no employment at all, and there's a lot of corruption and there is some danger, depending on who you are and where you are, but it's generally poverty. These are economic migrants. Not to say there are not some who are fleeing actual violence or threats from the gangs, et cetera, that can happen, or maybe domestic violence situation, but that is by no means the majority.
Very interesting. William Lajeunesse, Fox national correspondent based in L.A., thank you so much for joining us.
You bet. Thanks, Dave.
From the Fox News Podcasts Network. In these ever-changing times, you can rely on Fox News for hourly updates for the very latest news and information on your time. Listen and download now at foxnewspodcast.com or wherever you get your favorite podcasts. Rate and review the Fox News Rundown on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen.
It's time for your Fox News commentary.
Cal Thomas.
What's on your mind?
During the rebellious 1960s, the slogan "Power to the People" became a mantra for the young to protest what they saw as oppression from their elders. Now comes a moment when significant numbers of Americans can exercise real power in ways that will improve the country. Most people will never attain a level of influence comparable to a president, a member of Congress, a Supreme Court justice, a newspaper editor, or a TV network anchor or reporter. But ultimate power does not reside in any of these institutions or professions. It resides in we the people. The pandemic has given especially parents of young children an opportunity to seize power they already possessed but have never fully exercised. With teachers' unions dictating when or if public schools will open again, parents are discovering the power of educating their children at home. There, they can not only teach the real history of the country, as opposed to the revisionist version now taught in too many schools, but add a moral foundation that secular public schools no longer provide. According to one estimate, in the spring of 2019, the last period for which figures are available, 2.5 million children in grades K through 12 were homeschooled. The trend over the last few years amounts to an estimated annual homeschooling growth rate of between 2 and 8%. That may not sound like much when you consider that 48.6 million K through 12 students attend public schools, according to the Census Bureau, but it suggests momentum. Combine homeschooling families with the 5.7 million students attending private schools, and you might call it a movement. Homeschooling is much easier today than it used to be. Not only are there substantial online resources, many parents are combining their skills and backgrounds with other parents. If one is deficient in history or math, another parent with knowledge of these subjects can contribute. Many of these subjects have been tainted by political correctness, and in the case of history, revisionism. Conservatives who want to preserve America from what they regard as incremental socialism should embrace homeschooling as a way to rescue the next generation and preserve the country. I've quoted her before, but this bears repeating. The late Barbara Bush said, "Your success as a family, our success as a nation, depends not on what happens inside the White House, but on what happens inside your house." Bush understood where real power comes from. Now, if more people will only seize that power and use it. I'm Cal Thomas.
You've been listening to the Fox News Rundown. Stay up to date by subscribing to this podcast at foxnewspodcasts.com. And for up-to-the-minute news, go to foxnews.com. Did you hear the news? Now you can. With instant updates from Fox News for Amazon Alexa. Just say,
"Alexa, play news from Fox."
In Fox News.
It's the latest when you need it. On demand from Fox News and Amazon Alexa.
Love Fox News? Click the subscribe button to get more of the news and opinion you trust. And click the Fox News Rundown playlist for the latest episodes.